Welcome to Vention Tips. Today we'll be covering how to use Lambda functions in MachineLogic. In our case, we'll demonstrate how to use these functions on a simple linear actuator. For background, Lambda functions now allow users to create short, custom functions to create dynamic recipes within our standard MachineLogic framework. And with that, let's get started. First, we'll navigate over to the MachineLogic tab. In this design, the system has already been configured. However, if you'd like to learn how to do this, you can see our video on programming linear actuators. We'll move on to the next page, where we'll select the pre-configured custom app titled Lambda Functions. In this tutorial, our goal is to create an application that makes the gantry of the actuator on screen travel x distance y number of times, both of these variables being input by the user. Now, let's switch over to the Variables tab to see what we have. Variables can now accept arrays, objects, strings, and JSON files in addition to the original option of integers. For us, we'll create a new variable and name it moveArray. We'll then fill it with an empty array by using square brackets. The other three variables are index, which will act as a counter, steps, which will be the number of times we want the gantry to move, and increment, which will be the distance traveled each step. With our variables created, we'll switch over to the Functions tab to create our Lambda function. Do this by clicking on the Add Lambda Function button. We'll name ours Create Moves. The Arguments section allows names, in our case variables, to be passed to the function body. We'll be passing it the variables increments and steps. If you would like to learn more, you can click on the Help icon just next to the Functions tab. One thing to note is that the arguments are not required to have the same name as the variable sent to it from the MachineLogic sequence. However, we'll be doing this in ours for consistency. Now, we can type out our function. It can be written using standard JavaScript syntax. The function will create and fill an array with the position that the actuator needs to travel to based on the input increment and number of steps. This is done by using a for loop that will index through each position of the array. At each looped position, the array will fill in the slot by multiplying the input increment by the current index plus 1. Once the loop is complete, it will return a filled array to the original function that called it. With our Lambda function created, let's go back to our main sequence that has been pre-built. We'll then add a command that will fill the variable moveArray created earlier with the output from our Lambda function. To do this, we will add a setVariable command, and from the drop-down menus, select from expression and select the variable moveArray. In the final input window, we'll call the Lambda function that we created earlier, as well as identify the arguments that are getting sent to it. Now, let's add a loop command that will loop our child sequence based on the number of steps that we selected earlier in our Variables tab. Moving over to the child sequence, we can modify it so that it will move the actuator to the positions of the array that we filled out via the Lambda function. It will then index to the next position of the array each time the loop completes a cycle. Let's go back to our main function and press play to see it in action. This has been a simple overview of how Lambda functions can be used in MachineLogic. However, when combined with a custom UI tool and other functions, you can create much more complex automation sequences directly in your browser. And that completes the intro tutorial on Lambda functions. Thank you for watching, and happy designing!